Thank you so much. Thank you all so much for being here, and I want to congratulate you on your bladder control. I understand a lot of you have been here since 8:30 this morning, and I'm greatly honored that there's still somebody there. Good advice is like news. It's where you happen to find it. And I want to start this talk with some of the best advice I ever got. I did not get it in my 60 years as a reporter on the job. I did not get it at a journalism school. I got it at an art school. Second only to my love of journalism is my love of art. And back in the day when I was struggling to find my artistic style, an art instructor gave me some of the best advice I ever got on anything. He said, look, stop worrying about your style. Just find an artist that you really like and copy him. Copy everything he does. And he says, as you do that, you will understand how he resolved the problems, and your own style will evolve out of that. So I want to tell you this morning, if there are any aspiring reporters, if there are news executives who are wondering, what is it that a reporter is supposed to do? What is the role of the journalist? I say this: get the story that David Fahrenthold wrote about how he covered the campaign and copy every single thing that he did. If you do that, you'll be just fine. And that's the best advice I can give you this morning. I really enjoyed the discussion. I thought the previous panel was one of the most pertinent of the morning, and I thoroughly enjoyed hearing Brian Stelter and his crew there. It was quite good. I want to try, and I've actually been asked to try to put all of this in some context. This was my 14th presidential campaign, and I will say this: it was not like the others. Normally, a campaign has some slogan or something that always comes to mind when you think of a campaign or that reminds you of a campaign. I like Ike, Nixon's the one, all the way with LBJ. But the question I was asked most often, and the thing that always comes to my mind that will make me remember this campaign, was, have you ever? And I want to tell you the answer to that is no. I have never seen anything like this campaign. I said that so often on television during the campaign, it became a drinking game among my younger colleagues at CBS. Every time I said, old Bob just said, hey, he's never seen anything like that, they had to take another drink. Luckily, we had a lot of designated drivers, so it all came out fine. This was truly a campaign like no other. It was a campaign where, for the first time in a long time, money didn't seem to matter. Just ask Jeb Bush about that. A campaign for the first time in modern history, the two parties nominated candidates that a majority of people neither liked nor trusted, where body parts got more attention than foreign policy at times, and where attitude often counted more than facts with voters. It was a campaign that provoked the former Speaker of the House, John Boehner, to brand candidate Ted Cruz as Lucifer in the flesh. And the Devil Worshippers Society challenged that and said, no, not true, he's not one of us. It's true, you can look that up. Strong letter to follow, but this was, in my opinion, the worst campaign I ever covered, and perhaps the first of my life. Donald Trump won the presidency, but the biggest winner was this massive cottage industry that's grown up around our political campaigns. Once again this year, a lot of people made a whole lot of money. I don't know what the voters got out of it, but they did very well. Some of us were pleased with the outcome, some of us were cast in despair, but I think the overall emotion felt by most people on election night was one of surprise, even among the Trump people, who I'm told on good authority that their own pollsters gave them a 20% chance of winning. They were surprised too. Those of us in the press were roundly criticized by all sides. We should always take criticism seriously and learn from it, and there were lessons to be learned this time. But we must also keep in mind that this is nothing new. Every campaign has its all the fault of the media phase. We were the nattering nabobs of negativity during the Nixon administration. We were the pointy-headed intellectuals who couldn't park our bicycle straight when George Wallace ran. And this year they hung some less clever but really nasty names on us. This is all part of the job. It is something that we all know about and expect. It's not, that part is not to be taken seriously. But let's talk a little bit about this year's criticism. First, the press was accused of electing Trump because we gave him so much exposure. Then we were accused of missing the story because we did not take him seriously. Finally, we were said to not really make much difference because Trump used social media to go around us. Well, as my boss, David Rhodes, said, you can pick your own adventure here, but all three of those things simply cannot be true. And they're not. My own belief, opinion clearly stated, is that Trump won because he played by new rules. He broke all the old rules, and his opponent played by the old rules. He understood, and this is sort of obvious in retrospect, but as Sherlock Holmes said, most things are obvious in retrospect. He understood that if he offered himself to enough television programs, he would be invited to be on some of them. And that is precisely what happened. I disagree with those who say the host didn't push back. They pushed back many times, but he was going on so many programs so often that the exposure overwhelmed the pushback. While people were pushing back on something he said yesterday, he was already on another program laying out new allegations. Whether he knew it or not, he was practicing the political strategy that was first identified by an Australian political consultant named Lyndon Crosby. He called it the dead cat theory. And the way that works is, no matter what the conversation people are having at a dinner party, if you throw a dead cat in the middle of the table, the conversation immediately turns to the dead cat. Donald Trump threw cats dead and alive on the table every time the narration went this way, and suddenly the attention was back on what he was talking about and was on him. I think in contrast, the campaign of his opponent Hillary Clinton did it the old way. It concentrated on fundraising and controlling the narrative, as they say in politics. In other words, never leave your candidate in a position of having to answer a question that does not fit the theme of the day. Limit live interviews, respond to all questions with well-rehearsed, focus group tested answers. After Trump had been on Morning Joe a number of times, I called him up and I asked Mika Brzezinski, I said, why don't you ever have Hillary Clinton on? And she said, getting an interview with Hillary Clinton is like getting an interview with Mother Teresa. And I think, in a way, that sums up this whole campaign and what happened. That was the story of the campaign, and by the time that the other candidates understood what was happening, it was simply too late. People were disgusted with the gridlock, with politics with usual, with both parties. The number of people who now identify themselves as Democrats and Republicans is at an all-time low. People didn't like the choice, but they wanted change. Maybe it was no more complicated than what former First Lady Barbara Bush had mused early in 2015 when she was urging her son Jeb not to run. She said, maybe it is that people are just tired of Kennedys and Clintons and Bushes. She may have been right. I found many people last year who either really liked or really disliked both of these candidates, but I found no one who said they needed more information before deciding which one to vote for or to vote against. In that sense, and I believe that is some evidence, that perhaps those of us in the press did our jobs. Even so, there are some really serious lessons to be learned here. I think too much information made its way onto the national conversation, and once it got there, it was difficult to remove. We have to be quicker from now on and more vigorous in challenging what we all came to know as fake news. Only now are we beginning to understand the danger that it poses. And only now are the big distribution companies, we heard the discussion about Facebook, only now they are recognizing that they simply have to take some responsibility to what the information is that they are distributing. They are news media companies, just like CBS News and the Washington Post and the New York Times. We take responsibility for what we distribute. They are going to have to find a better way to do that too. In an effort to show balance, I think too many so-called surrogates and strategists made their way onto television and were given far more credibility than they deserved. I kept wondering. I'd see somebody on television and say Republican strategist or Democratic strategist. What did that mean? That they put out yard signs in the previous campaign? I mean, they clearly, and it didn't take long to listen to them to understand they had no understanding and really no contact with either of the campaigns, but there they were. I think for whatever reason, perhaps to add drama to increase the horse race tension, we tended to make, I think, too much of slight changes in the polls. We talked about one candidate or another leading by a single point, when in fact the shifts in those polls were well within the margin of error. There's no such thing as a 1-point lead in any poll. I think we also place too much faith in general in polling. The truth is polling is simply not as good as it once was. Where respondents were once honored to be part of polls, now people want nothing to do with pollsters. Fewer than 20%, or I beg your pardon, fewer than 10% of the people polled now are willing to actually talk to a pollster on a phone. That raises really serious questions. I don't care how you weight these polls. What did the 90% of people who refused to talk to a pollster, how do you determine what it is they had to say? Jill Lepore, the Harvard historian who writes for the New Yorker, told me something that I found fascinating. She said, we are tending to look on polling data as some sort of higher truth. And she brought up an interesting point. With the closing of so many newspapers and shrinking staff, she says that too many times we are replacing a lot of beat reporting and man-on-the-street interviewing simply because news organizations don't have the people to do it anymore with polling data. We're replacing it with what many news organizations used to do. They'd go to the local PTA meeting. They'd go to the local bar. They just talk to people and say, how do you feel about this? What do you really think about it? Surprisingly, the dean of polling in America, Peter Hart, who heads the Wall Street Journal, New York Times poll, I beg your pardon, the Wall Street Journal ABC poll, I guess it is, Peter said that he agrees with what Jill Lepore said. He told me that we have started thinking in statistics and dynamics and analytics, and that just doesn't work. Because analytics will tell you certain things. They will tell you where people shop. They will tell you what movies they like. But he said they don't tell you what is in people's hearts. That is something that I think we in the media need to take to heart. We need to get back to knocking on doors and asking people how they feel. Yes, we want polling to back it up, but we need face-to-face participation and checking with people in these various communities. What really complicated this whole situation was that all of this is being played out, this campaign, which was the most unusual I can recall, in the midst of a technological revolution that is having a profound effect not only on how we get news, but on our entire culture. The web gives us access to more information than any people who have ever lived on this earth at any one time have ever had access to. But are we just overwhelmed with information, so much we can't process it, or are we wiser? I think at this point we're probably just overwhelmed. So much information, we can't deal with it. The web gives us this unbelievable access, but there are some downsides. For one thing, the nuts can all find each other now. I don't care how bizarre your attitude or your feeling is about something, you can find somebody out there that agrees with what you're thinking. False news, some of this news false by design, can go around the world in a millisecond, and it is simply going to have to be dealt with. The coming of digital has also thrown local newspapers into a downward economic spiral from which many are not going to recover. We lost 126 newspapers in this country over the last 10 years. Other newspapers are down so thin that your water bill is probably thicker than the local newspaper some people are getting in their communities now. This has had a huge impact on politics, how politicians campaign, how people are finding out who is running. I think unless we find some entity that can somehow do what we have always expected of local newspapers, we're going to have corruption in this country, not just in politics, but just corruption in general at a level we have never seen in this country. This is the great crisis in journalism right now. The good news is that some of the bigger news organizations, especially the New York Times and the Washington Post, are finding ways to exist in this new and very different communications landscape. They are no longer just newspapers publishing a paper newspaper every day. They have become 24/7 multi-platform news organizations, companies that provide breaking news, video coverage, running commentary, websites, newsletters, podcasts. They are looking for more and more ways to reach people. The good news is this is working. While circulation of the paper newspapers is down, during November of last year, both the Times and the Post in 1 month were reaching as many as 70 million viewers. 70 million people were reading or finding some contact with those news organizations. The news organizations' executives will tell you that while this technology is giving them this great reach, their viability will still depend on whether they are giving news that people need to improve their lives. If you can do that, if you can make your news organization relevant by providing information that people have to have, then they will survive. And there must be new concentration on that by all news organizations as we go forward. But at the local level, many of the things that these big newspapers have figured out how to do, they can be a pattern for news organizations at the local level. At CBS News, for example, we now have inaugurated a 24-hour all-news streaming network that you get on your phone or your laptop or your computer. You don't get it on your television set unless you go through Hulu or one of those organizations like that. During both political conventions last summer, we would sometimes have more people looking at that than were watching CBS News on the television network. So there are ways, and we will find a way to accommodate, but this is just like we're in a place here now where the world was after the invention of the printing press. Martin Luther said it was God's extremest, greatest gift, but it took a while for the world to work its way through that. It was also, there were 30 years of religious wars after the invention of the printing press. Eventually, equilibrium was reached. We're in another period much like that. Equilibrium has not yet been reached, but we have to recognize where we are. I want to close by just talking about, in this new and very different world, what is the role of the individual journalist? And quite simply, it is what it has always been. We are not the opposition party, as some would have you believe, nor do we believe we are, nor is it our place to sit down and shut up and let the world pass by, as some have wished that we would do. The politicians, government officials, and journalists all have very different roles. The politicians are there to run the campaigns. Government officials are there to run the government. They are there to deliver a message. Our job is simply to check out the message, determine if it's true, and if so, what will be its impact on the governed. In a totalitarian society, there is only one source of news, and that is the government. In our form of government, an independent press gathers accurate information and provides it to the citizens, and they can take that information, compare it to the government's version of events, and then decide what to do about it. Those who would underline our role are, quite honestly, and I mean this directly, undermining the foundations of this country and what it was founded on. We must always remember and never hold ourselves out to be the exclusive source of wisdom or morality. We are not. Our job is simply to ask questions and to keep asking until we get an answer. That will not always be easy, nor will we always be the most popular people in the room, but that is what the founders intended, and it is as vital to our form of government as the right to vote. I've been a reporter for 60 years, and I have never been prouder of my profession than I am today. Thank you.